It begins with a piece of baked clay, resting in near darkness. A tablet, recovered from the ruins of Nippur, no larger than a human hand. Its surface is a dense field of wedge-shaped marks, impressed into the clay nearly 4,000 years ago when it was still wet. The edges are chipped, and a fine crack runs diagonally across its face, a silent fracture in the narrative it holds. The object itself does not feel sacred. It feels administrative, heavy with the simple, undeniable weight of a ledger or a field report. One of thousands excavated from the dust, it was catalogued, numbered, and placed in a drawer, a single data point among countless others from a civilization that measured its history in millennia. To look upon it is to confront an immediate and profound silence. The script is cuneiform, a language that has not been spoken for an age of the world. Its translation is the work of a lifetime, a slow and painstaking process of matching symbols to sounds, sounds to words, and words to a context that is almost entirely lost to us. Every gap in the clay is a missing clause, a lost intention. We are not reading a story. We are looking at the ghost of one, pieced together from fragments. The work of the archaeologist is not one of discovery, but of careful and incomplete reconstruction, an attempt to hear a voice that has long since faded into the earth. The first coherent lines that emerge from this particular tablet, designated as the poem of Atrahasis, do not speak of gods in the way we expect. They do not describe the creation of the heavens or the earth. Instead, they record a problem of labor. They list the duties assigned to a class of beings known as the Igigi, detailing the immense toil they were forced to endure. The digging of rivers, the excavation of canals. The language is procedural, outlining tasks and responsibilities. It is the cold, dispassionate tone of a work order, a document defining the operational parameters of a cosmic workforce. This is not myth. It is a memorandum. If you are new to this kind of investigation, I would ask you to subscribe and join our records. It is a quiet process, and your presence here ensures this work continues. The text then documents a failure in this system. The Igigi, after thousands of years of labor, refuse to continue. They burn their tools. They surround the dwelling of their chief administrator, Enlil. The tablet records their complaint not as a sin or a moral failing, but as a strike, a work stoppage. The crisis that sets the entire narrative in motion is not a war in the heavens or a battle between good and evil. It is a logistical breakdown. The project of maintaining the world has stalled because the workforce has walked off the job. This is the first disturbance, the first detail that feels out of place. We are forced to pause here. The weight of this document is not in what it says, but in how it says it. The scribe who pressed these marks into the clay was not composing an epic to inspire awe. They were recording the minutes of a crisis meeting. The focus is on the problem. The canals are not being maintained. The work is not being done. The tone suggests that the authors of this text viewed the universe as a vast and complex project, one that required constant management, resource allocation, and above all, labor. The divine is presented not as a matter of faith, but of function. To remain with this kind of record is to keep a certain kind of watch. It is a decision to not lose the trail of these quiet, unsettling details as they surface from the archives. This administrative tone is not an anomaly. It is a recurring feature in the oldest records recovered from Mesopotamia. Lists of goods, receipts for grain, legal codes, and astronomical observations all share this same detached precision. The scribal culture of Sumer and Akkad was one of meticulous accounting. They were the bookkeepers of civilization, and it appears they were the bookkeepers of the cosmos as well. The Atrahasis tablet is not an outlier. It is a product of a mindset that documented everything, from the yield of a barley field to the rebellion of the gods, with the same methodical calm. And so, when the record states the solution proposed by the High Council, the Anunnaki, It does so with that same procedural clarity. A new being must be created, one designed specifically for a single purpose: to bear the load of the gods. The text does not speak of creating humanity in a divine image or for a grand spiritual purpose. It speaks of manufacturing a replacement worker. The origin of our species, according to this ancient report, was an engineering solution to an industrial dispute. The proposal is laid out like a project plan, a direct response to the failure of the previous labor model. The tablet rests there, under the low light of the archive. It holds no celebration of our creation. It offers no grand promises of destiny. It simply records the circumstances that led to a decision, a problem, a meeting, a proposal. The story begins not with a flash of divine light, but with the quiet, bureaucratic necessity of keeping a complex system operational. And as we read these opening lines, a question begins to form, one that was not meant to be asked. If this document is a true record, then our beginning was not a genesis, it was a replacement. The process is documented with the precision of a formula. The High Council does not speak of breathing life into a formless being. Instead, the record specifies the materials and the procedure. Let one god be slaughtered. The tablet reads, so that all the gods may be cleansed by his immersion. From his flesh and his blood, let Nintu mix the clay. It is a list of ingredients, a sequence of actions. The language is not that of creation, but of fabrication. The divine element is not a soul, but a binding agent, a component required for the mixture to hold. We are looking at the technical specifications for a new model of worker. The text is not concerned with the sanctity of life, but with the properties of the materials. The sacrificed god, Geshtu-A, is described as one who has intelligence, and this quality is to be mixed into the clay. This is not to grant humanity wisdom, but to ensure the new worker can understand orders, to make it a functional asset. The scribe records this detail with the same dispassion as one would note the temper of a metal or the quality of a stone. It is a note on the raw materials. The production quota is then clearly stated. The process is not for a single progenitor, but for a batch. 7 and 7, the record repeats. After the clay is prepared, the birth goddesses are gathered. 7 males she brought forth. 7 females she brought forth. The language is one of symmetry and standardized output. The creation of our species, in this account, is a planned manufacturing run, designed to produce a specific number of units, balanced and ready for deployment. The focus is on the number, the efficiency of the process. This record does not describe a family. It describes an inventory. 14 beings, produced in a single cycle, ready to be assigned their function. There is no mention of a garden, no period of innocence. The text moves directly from their creation to their purpose. The scribe's focus remains on the logistical chain: problem, proposal, fabrication, deployment. The narrative does not pause for wonder. It proceeds with the efficiency of an administrative report, moving from one stage of the project to the next. One must sit with this for a moment. The idea of a beginning not as a singular, sacred event, but as a production line. The first of our kind not as children of a god, but as the initial output of a new manufacturing process. The tablet does not ask for reverence. It simply documents a procedure that was followed, a quota that was met. The silence of the archive feels different when you hold this thought. It feels less like the silence of ages, and more like the silence of a factory after the machinery has been turned off. The purpose of this new being is stated without ambiguity. The record is explicit. He imposed the drudgery on man. The Akkadian word is dalu, toil, forced labor. There is no other function assigned. The text does not speak of worship, of a covenant, or of a divine plan for our spiritual development. It documents a simple transfer of labor. The load that the Igigi refused to carry was now placed upon this newly created entity. The problem of the strike was solved. The scribe offers no commentary on this transaction. They simply record the outcome. The canals would now be dug, the Earth maintained, the cosmic project would continue. Humanity's existence, from its first moment, was defined by this utility. We were made to bear a load. The record is clear on this point. Any other purpose we have found for ourselves since is an invention of our own, absent from the original design specification. Time passes in the record, measured in vast, impersonal units. The text speaks of cycles of 600 years, then of 200 years. During these periods, the human workers perform their function as designed. The system is stable. The project is operational. The scribe documents this era of functionality with the same detached tone. There are no hymns of praise for humanity's diligence, no divine satisfaction noted. There is only the quiet ticking of a cosmic clock, measuring the output of a system that is, for the moment, working. Then, a new entry appears in the log. The land grew wide. The peoples became numerous. This is not recorded as a success or a blessing. It is presented as a change in operational parameters. The system is scaling, and with that scale comes an unintended consequence. The project is beginning to deviate from its initial specifications. The tone is that of an engineer observing an unexpected output, a variable that was not accounted for in the original model. The specific problem is then logged. The chief administrator, Enlil, is disturbed. The noise of mankind has become too great for me. The tablet records him saying, "By their noise I am deprived of sleep." The word is rigmu. It means din, clamor, hubbub. This is the official justification for the crisis that follows. Not a moral failing, not a rebellion against the gods. The first failure of humanity was a noise violation. It was a functional flaw. The machine had become too loud. Notice the silence in the room where you are now. The record, in contrast, speaks only of a growing noise, a sound that began to trouble the sleep of the system's managers. One must pause at the sheer strangeness of this complaint. The fate of a species hangs on a disturbance of this nature. It is the complaint of a landlord about a tenant, not a god about his creation. The disproportion between the cause, noise, and the consequences that will follow is where the administrative narrative begins to feel alien. It suggests a logic that is not concerned with justice or morality, but with operational comfort and system stability. The council convenes. A decision is recorded. The first measure is not a warning, not a chance for correction. It is a direct order for population reduction. The god of plagues is summoned and instructed to unleash a disease upon the human workforce. The scribe notes this as the first of 3 attempts to solve the noise problem. It is a methodical, iterative approach to debugging a system that has gone out of tolerance, a controlled culling. But the record shows this first attempt fails. The chief designer, the god Enki, who had overseen the original fabrication, secretly intervenes. He provides his creation, Atrahasis, with the technical information needed to counteract the plague. The text records his instructions, a procedural workaround to bypass the executive order. What we are reading is a documented conflict between management and engineering, a dispute over whether to patch a system or to scrap it. The cycle is then repeated in the administrative record. After another period of time, the population recovers, and the noise returns. A second council is held. This time, the solution recorded is a drought, a withholding of resources to again reduce the number of units. The scribe documents this second attempt with the same formulaic language. Problem: noise. Solution: population reduction. Method 2. The repetition itself is the most unsettling detail. It confirms this is not an act of passion, but a series of controlled experiments. We are not reading a story of divine anger. We are reading the log of a pest control operation. The beings created to solve one problem have now become a problem themselves. The managers of the system are testing various methods to bring the workforce back down to a manageable size, to reduce its disruptive output. Each failure is logged, and a new solution is proposed. The lives and deaths of these first humans are simply data points in a series of failed trials. Finally, the record shows a decision of finality. The incremental solutions have failed. Enlil, the chief administrator, declares the entire project a loss. He convenes the council one last time and demands a permanent solution, a flood that will bring about the total destruction of his people. This is not a punishment, it is a product recall. It is the executive decision to decommission a faulty system entirely. The final entry before the catastrophe is a legalistic one. To ensure no rogue engineer like Enki can interfere again, Enlil makes the entire Council of Gods swear a binding oath. They are all made to pledge their compliance with the plan for total erasure. The scribe records this oath. It is the final piece of paperwork, the last administrative checkmark before shutting down the project and wiping the slate clean. It is a corporate, not a divine, act. The work of the researcher is not always one of forward motion. Sometimes it is an act of arrangement, of placing one silent object next to another and waiting for a resonance to cross the gap. The Atrahasis tablet is moved from its isolation. Beside it, on the cool, dark surface of the viewing table is placed a digital rendering of another document from the same soil, the Sumerian King List. It is not a story but a column of names and numbers, a stark and vertical accounting of power. The two records, from different hands and different centuries, now share the same space, the same low light. The King List is unflinching in its structure. It names a king, then a city, then the number of years he reigned. The numbers are precise and impossible. Alulim, 28, 800 years. Alalangar, 36, 00 years. 8 kings, a total of 241, 200 years. Then, the scribe makes a simple, declarative entry that changes everything. It is a single line, an administrative note closing a chapter of history. It reads, "Then the flood swept over." After that line, the list of kings resumes, but the reigns are shorter, human. Here, in the quiet of the archive, a pattern begins to resolve from the background noise of history. Two completely different types of document, one a narrative poem, the other a dynastic ledger. Both use a great flood as a primary structural divider. They both speak of a world that existed before this event and a world that came after. It is a shared punctuation mark, a hard reset recorded in the foundational memory of Mesopotamian civilization. The event was not just a story. It was a chronological boundary as real to them as a change in dynasty or the fall of a city. The researcher's finger traces the line on the screen where the flood is mentioned in the king list. Then it moves to the clay of Atrahasis. It is a gesture of connection, an attempt to bridge the silence between two independent witnesses, testifying to the same cataclysm. The mind resists the simplicity of it. Coincidence feels too easy an answer. We are looking at the emergence of a standardized history, a consensus reality about a past that should not exist. To continue watching this file as it is reassembled is to acknowledge this emerging pattern. It is a choice to remain present as the pieces are aligned and to see where the resonance leads. The researcher now introduces a third artifact into this silent conversation, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Specifically, Tablet Ankul. Here, the hero Gilgamesh, searching for immortality, finds a man who survived the Great Flood. His name is Utnapishtim. His story, which he recounts to Gilgamesh, is not a brief mention, but a detailed personal testimony, a survivor's account of the event that divides the king list and concludes the Atrahasis project. The third echo is the loudest yet. Utnapishtim's account is chillingly familiar. He speaks of a secret council of the gods, a decision made in private to destroy mankind. He, like Atrahasis, is warned by the god Ea, the Akkadian name for Enki. The instructions are specific, technical. Tear down your house, Build a boat. The dimensions are given, the materials specified. It is a blueprint for survival, a technical schematic passed from a dissenting engineer to a chosen human operative, bypassing the executive order for total erasure. The record continues with the same procedural coldness. Utnapishtim describes loading the boat not just with his family, but with the seed of all living things. He details the sealing of the vessel, the coming of the storm, and the terror of the world outside dissolving into water. The gods themselves, he notes, were frightened by the force they had unleashed. The account is personal, yet it follows the same operational sequence as the Atrahasis report. A decision by the Council, a secret intervention by Enki EA, and a controlled preservation of biological data. We are no longer looking at an isolated story. We are looking at a protocol. 3 of the most important surviving documents from the ancient world, a poem about creation, a list of kings, and the world's first great heroic epic, all hinge on the same core event. The flood is not a myth. In the context of these records, it is a historical and operational fact, a recurring entry in the administrative memory of this civilization. Its repetition transforms it from a story into a documented procedure. The weight of this repetition settles in the room. The initial strangeness of the Atrahasis tablet now feels less like an anomaly, and more like the most detailed version of a standard report. The other texts are corroborating witnesses, each confirming the fundamental architecture of the event, even if their own details have softened over time. A new line of inquiry opens. The researcher isolates the decision-making process in both Atrahasis and Gilgamesh. In both accounts, the order for destruction comes from the same entity, the god Enlil, the chief administrator. And in both accounts, the reason for his anger is the central point of conflict. The motive is the key to understanding the nature of the event, whether it was an act of justice or a logistical correction. And in that comparison, a crucial detail emerges from the pattern. The recurring figure of Enki, or Ea, is not merely a savior. He represents a consistent, systemic counter-argument to Enlil's decision. In both narratives, he is bound by the oath of the council but finds a loophole. He does not speak to the human directly. He whispers the instructions to the wall of a reed hut, a technicality that allows him to preserve the project while not directly violating the council's orders. This is the behavior of a dissenting board member, not a benevolent deity. This repeated conflict between Enlil and Enki suggests a fundamental schism in the governing body. It is a documented dispute over project management. Enlil, the administrator, sees the human workforce as a failed experiment to be terminated. Enki, the original designer, argues for preservation and a system reboot. The flood, then, is not a simple cataclysm. It is the result of a corporate dispute, a battle between 2 opposing management philosophies that was settled with extreme prejudice. Now the researcher focuses on the most unsettling detail from the original report: the official justification, the noise of mankind. The researcher performs a search, aligning the texts, looking for the Akkadian word rigmu, or its conceptual equivalent in Utnapishtim's testimony within the Gilgamesh epic. He is looking for the reason, the stated cause for the product recall. And here, the pattern breaks. In the Gilgamesh version, Utnapishtim does not give a clear reason for the god's decision. The text is more vague, speaking only of the uproar of humanity. The specific, bizarrely technical complaint of noise disturbing Enlil's sleep is absent. The original justification, the one that felt so alien and administrative, has been lost or edited out in this later retelling. It has been smoothed over, replaced by a more generalized and mythologically acceptable narrative of human failing. This absence is more disturbing than any detail the texts contain. It suggests an editorial process is at work over the centuries. The most revealing detail of the Atrahasis report, the one that frames the event as a functional problem rather than a moral one, is the very detail that seems to be selectively erased from the record over time. The story is being slowly cleaned, its sharp administrative edges worn down into the softer shape of a myth. We are witnessing the degradation of a technical report into a legend. The further we move from the date of the original event, the more the inconvenient, operational specifics seem to disappear. The silence, where the word Rigmu should be in Gilgamesh, is the sound of an uncomfortable fact being forgotten, of a history being deliberately rewritten to be more palatable. The question is no longer just what happened. The question is, what part of the original record was deemed so problematic that it had to be systematically scrubbed from the official memory? If the noise complaint was the first detail to be erased, we must now wonder what other, even stranger facts about our origin were erased before the scribe ever pressed his stylus into the clay. We must now speak of the ones who made the decisions. The records do not call them gods in the way we understand the term. They are referred to by a collective designation, the Anunnaki. It is a name that appears in lists and administrative texts with the frequency of a corporate title. It is not a word of worship. It is a classification, a term for a group with a defined status. The texts present them not as a family of temperamental deities, but as a council, a board, a governing body. Their first appearance in this story is in a meeting, convened to address a logistical crisis. This framing is the first and most critical deviation from myth. A council implies procedure. It suggests debate, hierarchy, and the formalization of power. These are not beings who act on pure whim. They are depicted as operating within a structure, one that requires assembly and consensus before a major decision can be enacted. The drama of our creation, as recorded, begins not with a divine thought, but with a formal motion tabled in a committee meeting. The universe these texts describe is a managed one. The hierarchy is specified. At its apex is a figure named Anu. His name is often invoked at the start of official documents, a symbol of ultimate authority, but he rarely appears as an active participant in the earthly project. He is the distant chairman, the remote sovereign whose power is the foundation upon which the entire structure rests. His decrees are final, but the day-to-day operations are delegated. He is a name on a letterhead, a final court of appeal that is never approached. His authority is felt most strongly through his absence. He does not dirty his hands with the management of the workforce or the digging of canals. His is a power that functions from a remove, a gravitational center around which the entire system orbits. This suggests a civilization, a structure so old and established that its leadership is layered, bureaucratic, and insulated from the mundane realities of its own projects. Power, in this model, is not demonstrated through action, but through delegation. The one to whom it is delegated is Enlil. The tablets name him as the chief administrator of the Earth Project. He is the one who directly oversees the Igigi, the one who is confronted by their rebellion, and the one whose sleep is disturbed by the noise of the human workers. He is the site manager, the governor of the territory. His role is executive. He implements the decisions and maintains order within his assigned domain. He is the central node of command and control on the ground. His reactions, as documented, are consistently those of a manager, not a god of wrath. The rebellion of the Igigi is a failure of labor management. The noise of humanity is a breach of operational parameters. His solutions, plague, drought, and finally the flood, are presented as escalating attempts to bring a system back into compliance. The record does not speak of his anger in moral terms, but of his frustration with a project that has become uncontrollable and disruptive. We are forced to see this name, Enlil, not as a symbol for divine fury, but as the title of an executive whose project has gone wrong. The scribe does not record a prayer to him, but the minutes of his decisions. The text is a log of his administrative actions, a paper trail documenting a series of corrective measures that culminate in a final order for decommissioning. The horror is not in the passion of a god, but in the dispassionate logic of a manager cutting his losses. Then there is the figure of Enki, also known as Ea. The records assign to him the mastery of wisdom, but also of engineering and fabrication. He is the one who designs the new worker, the Lulu Amalu. He is the chief scientist, the head of the technical division. His function is not to rule, but to solve problems through creation and design. He is the system's primary innovator, the one who understands how the machine is built because he is the one who drafted the schematics. His actions throughout the record are consistently those of a creator protecting the integrity of his work. When Enlil orders the culling of humanity, Enki leaks a technical workaround to his chosen operative, Atrahasis. He does not challenge Enlil's authority directly. He exploits a loophole in the sworn oath of the council. This is not the act of a benevolent savior. It is the act of a chief engineer who believes his design is sound, refusing to allow the manager to scrap a project he sees as salvageable. The conflict that defines our origin story is not a cosmic battle between good and evil. It is an internal dispute between the head of operations and the head of research and development. Enlil, the manager, sees a failed product that is causing systemic disruption. Enki, the designer, sees a successful prototype that is being mismanaged and has the potential for a system reboot. The flood is the result of the manager winning the argument. The records name others, each with a specific, limited function. Nintu, the birth goddess, is brought in to handle the physical process of fabrication. She is the specialist who mixes the divine element with the clay and oversees the birthing of the first 14 units. Her role is that of a lead technician on an assembly line. She is not a mother figure. She is a biological manufacturing expert. Her involvement is purely procedural. She is given the formula, she executes the production run, and then her role in the narrative is complete. She is a contractor, brought in for a specific task, and her presence underscores the industrial, non-sacred nature of the creation event. Her work is not a miracle. It is a standardized biological process, repeated to meet a quota. And we must remember the Igigi. The texts introduce them by their labor. They are the ones who dug the canals and bore the toil. They are the original workforce, a class of beings defined entirely by their function within the system. They are not fallen angels. They are striking workers. Their story is not one of moral failure, but of a collective refusal to continue under the assigned working conditions. Their fate is not damnation, but obsolescence. They are not punished in a pit of fire. The system simply designs and implements their replacement. The Council's solution to the labor strike is to create a new class of worker, one presumably designed to be more durable or more compliant. The Igigi are a discontinued product line. We are left looking at the names on the page not as a pantheon, but as an organizational chart. Anu as the distant chairman of the board, Enlil as the chief operating officer, Enki as the head of engineering, Nintu as a manufacturing specialist, the Igigi as the original labor force. This is the language of a corporate structure, of a complex and highly stratified organization. The tablets, when read this way, cease to be mythology. They become a set of leaked corporate documents from a project that took place long ago. The story they tell is not about the birth of a soul, but about the administration of a resource. And if this was the management team, the question that hangs in the silence is no longer who they were, but what, exactly, was the nature of the vast, silent enterprise they were running. The researchers' work now turns from the text to the earth itself. In the archaeological strata of ancient Mesopotamian cities, Ur, Kish, Shuruppak, there is a recurring and unnerving feature. Below the layers of dynastic history, of temples and palaces, excavators consistently encounter a sterile deposit of clay and silt, sometimes meters thick. It is a clean break in the timeline, a uniform blanket of river sediment containing no pottery shards, no tools, no bones. It is a layer of absolute silence, devoid of any trace of the human activity that thrived both before and after its deposition. This is not a metaphor. It is a physical fact, a geological scar marking a moment when civilization was washed away. To stand in an excavation pit and see this line is to witness an interruption made manifest. Below the silt line lies the evidence of one culture. Above it, the evidence of another. The styles of pottery change, the architecture is different. The very footprint of the city is altered. It is a clear and unambiguous boundary, a point at which one world ended and another, different world began. The soil itself corroborates the record of the scribe. It testifies not to a gradual transition, but to a sudden and catastrophic reset, a moment when the slate was wiped clean by a force that left only mud in its wake. This physical silence in the earth corresponds with unnerving precision to the structural silence in the Sumerian king list. The ledger records the impossibly long reigns of 8 kings, a civilization spanning 200 years. Then, the scribe inserts the line. Then the flood swept over. After this entry, the record resumes, but the scale of time has collapsed. The kings have human lifespans. The sterile layer of silt in the ground and this dividing line in the foundational document of their history are 2 independent witnesses testifying to the same event. They are the physical and administrative evidence of a single, world-altering erasure. One must simply observe this alignment. The earth, the clay, the king list. They do not argue or interpret. They present a sequence, a long and stable period of existence, a sudden, violent interruption, and then the beginning of a new and different order. The silence in the ground is not empty. It is a placeholder for a history that was terminated. It is the sealed and final report on a project that was brought to a definitive close, leaving nothing behind but a clean foundation for whatever was to come next. We return to the tablets themselves, to the fractured vessel of the story. The Atrahasis poem survives on broken pieces of clay. Entire sections of the narrative are missing, lost to time in the form of physical gaps, or lacunae. In the most critical passages, the direct aftermath of the flood, the reaction of the survivors, the new terms of existence imposed by the council, the text often dissolves into a series of broken signs and untranslatable fragments. The record becomes unintelligible at the precise moment we most need it to be clear. The administrative report has been physically redacted by the simple, brutal fact of its own fragility. These gaps are not merely an inconvenience for the translator. They are an active presence in the story. They represent a form of censorship enacted not by a scribe, but by the earth itself. We are given the executive decision for the flood and the technical details for the survival of a chosen few, but the direct human consequence, the trauma of the world's end, is lost in the cracks. The story is an official report, with its most sensitive sections physically torn out, leaving us to stare into the void where the testimony of the survivors should be. This physical corruption of the record forces us to consider the more deliberate forms of editing. The later Gilgamesh epic softened the administrative strangeness of the noise complaint. What other inconvenient details, what other operational specifics were lost in these physical gaps, scrubbed from the record before it was even broken? The cracks in the clay are no longer just damage. They are a reminder of the story's inherent instability, a permanent question mark embedded in the very material of the evidence. The invisible antagonist of erasure has left its fingerprints directly on the artifact. Take a moment now. Mark the silence that hangs between these broken records. This is the space where the unwritten history resides. Register this quiet, for it is as much a part of the evidence as the cuneiform itself. Now we confront a different kind of void, a chronological one. The Sumerian king list begins abruptly. The first king, Alulim, is given the throne. But the text does not say what existed before Alulim. There is no preamble, no creation story for the system of kingship itself. The official history of the world, as documented by the scribes, simply switches on at a specific moment, with a fully formed civilization and a king already in place. The time before this first entry is a complete and total blank. This is not a forgotten history. It is an unrecorded one. The scribes of Mesopotamia were meticulous accountants of time, measuring dynasties and reigns with obsessive precision. For them to leave the entire period before the first king as a void is not an oversight. It is a structural decision. It implies that for the purposes of the official record, history did not exist before that point. Or, more unsettlingly, that the history that did exist was not to be included in the new ledger. If the Atrahasis text is a report on the decommissioning of a failed model of humanity, then this pre-dynastic void in the king list could be the silent, unrecorded era of that first version. The official history begins only after the flood, after the system reboot. The ledger of civilization opens on page 1, with no mention of the draft that was discarded, burned, and buried before this final version was approved for release. The greatest erasure may not be the flood itself, but the successful deletion of everything that came before it. The mind recoils from the implication that our entire recorded past, the foundation of all subsequent history, might be a carefully curated second edition. The silence before the first name on the king list is the sound of a vault door closing, sealing away a past that was deemed a failure, an experiment that was not to be remembered. We are not looking at the dawn of history. We are looking at the moment the official cover-up began. A similar erasure occurs on a smaller, more specific scale. The name of the god sacrificed to create humanity, Geshtui, is mentioned only once. He is described as the one who has intelligence, a quality to be mixed into the clay as a functional component. After this single mention, his name disappears from the Mesopotamian pantheon. There are no hymns sung to him, no temples built in his honor, no further references to his existence. He is a key ingredient, a critical part of the formula, who is used and then utterly forgotten. His absence from the record is telling. He is not a revered ancestor or a martyred creator. He is a raw material, a resource that was consumed during the manufacturing process. His identity and fate beyond this single functional application are considered irrelevant by the scribe. His entire being is reduced to a feature, intelligence, that was needed for the new worker model. He is a footnote in a technical manual, and once the procedure is complete, the footnote is no longer needed. This instrumental view of a divine being reveals the cold logic at the heart of this entire process. Value is determined by utility alone. The Anunnaki Council, the scribe, the entire system they represent, appears to operate on a principle of radical pragmatism. If a being, even a god, serves its function, it is noted. When that function is complete, its existence is no longer relevant to the record. This calculated disposal of a key creative element makes one question the inherent value assigned to the final product. A humanity fabricated from a component that was itself deemed disposable. This leads to the most profound absence of all, the complete lack of a moral framework. In the Atrahasis narrative, the words for sin, evil, guilt, pochum, or redemption are never used to describe humanity's failure. The vocabulary is exclusively operational. The problem is noise. The population has become too numerous. The solution is destruction. The scribe is not recording a divine judgment on a fallen creation. He is logging a series of system errors and the escalating administrative responses. This silence of conscience is perhaps the most alien feature of the entire record. The decision to eradicate a species is framed without any ethical or moral justification. It is a logistical correction, a solution to a problem of systemic disruption. The absence of this moral dimension suggests that the authors of this record did not view humanity through a lens of right and wrong, but through a lens of function and malfunction. We were not their children who had disappointed them. We were a piece of machinery that had begun to operate outside of its design specifications. We are left staring into a void where our sense of cosmic justice should be. We have been searching for a sacred origin story in a document that reads like a redacted engineering log from a failed project. The true history is not contained in the wedge-shaped marks pressed into the clay. It is held in the calculated silences between them, in the sterile layers of earth, and in the deliberate, systemic erasure of a past that was not meant to survive the final report. If the records are to be believed, then the language they use is the most important clue we possess. The decision to create a species, and the subsequent decision to erase it, are documented with the same dispassionate clarity as the allocation of grain rations or the surveying of a canal. This is not the language of gods creating children. It is the language of a vast, ancient, and impersonal system documenting its own internal processes. The text is not a revelation intended for us. It is a memorandum, filed for a record we were never meant to access. The story of our beginning seems to be a footnote in a ledger that belongs to someone else. This forces us to re-evaluate the actors. The Anunnaki, in this context, cease to be deities in any sense we would recognize. They appear instead as administrators, as regional directors of a project whose ultimate scope remains entirely outside the frame of the narrative. Their conflicts, their debates, their decisions, all seem to be governed by a protocol that predates them, a set of operational directives they are tasked with executing. They are not the source of the power. They are the managers of its application on this particular asset, this world. Their authority is immense, but it appears to be delegated. Their entire enterprise seems less like a kingdom and more like a long-term resource management operation. The digging of rivers, the maintenance of the earth, the creation of a workforce, these are the actions of colonists, of engineers, of a group tasked with developing a territory for a purpose that is never stated. The records are so focused on the how that they never once touch upon the ultimate why. This silence suggests the purpose was so self-evident to the authors that it required no explanation, or so far beyond the scope of this specific report that it was simply irrelevant. Within this framework, the noise of humanity becomes something other than a nuisance. If the first humans were created for a single function, toil, then any behavior outside that function could be registered by the system as an error, a signal degradation. The rig-moo, the din, may not have been a literal sound. It may have been the administrative term for a growing cascade of non-functional, unpredictable activity. It might have been the signal of emergent properties, culture, self-awareness, collective will, that the system registered as a dangerous and destabilizing form of static. Humanity's first failure, then, was not disobedience. It was complexity. We were designed as a simple tool, but we began to evolve into a complex system ourselves. We were a program that began writing its own code, a process that was not part of the original design specification. The project was not failing because the workers were lazy. It was failing because they were ceasing to be mere workers. They were becoming something else, and that something else was generating an output that interfered with the operations of the primary system. This reframes the central conflict. Enlil, the administrator, is not a wrathful god. He is a system operator attempting to shut down a rogue process that threatens the stability of the entire network. His methods are severe because the deviation is critical. From his perspective, the emergent complexity of the human workforce is a virus, and his response is to wipe the drive clean. He is the pragmatist, the enforcer of the original project parameters, who sees any deviation as a threat to be neutralized. Enki's role, in turn, becomes far more ambiguous. He is not a savior motivated by love. He is the original designer, the chief engineer who sees this unexpected emergent complexity not as a bug, but as a fascinating and potentially valuable new feature. His decision to preserve a sample of the creation is not an act of rebellion for humanity's sake. It is an act of data preservation. He is unwilling to see the most interesting result of his experiment be deleted without further study. He is taking a backup before the system is reset. The flood, therefore, ceases to be a punishment. It becomes a hard reboot on a planetary scale. It is a controlled, systemic purge designed to erase a failed iteration and the unpredictable data it had generated. It is the final executive solution to a problem of containment. The goal was not just to reduce the population, but to wipe the slate clean, to remove the contaminated version of the project so a new, more controlled version could be initiated under stricter parameters. The world was not destroyed. It was decommissioned and then recommissioned. The physical evidence in the soil, the sterile layer of silt, is the physical signature of this event. It is the scar left by the reformatting process, a geological boundary marker between two distinct operating systems. The civilization below that line was version 1.0. The civilization that was founded above it, our own, is version 2.0, a new installation on a freshly wiped server. We are not living in the aftermath of a myth. We are living in the clean room that was established after a catastrophic industrial accident. This suggests that the world before that reset operated under a different set of rules. The impossibly long lifespans of the pre-flood kings in the Sumerian list may not be metaphor. They may be a literal record from a biological or physical reality that was fundamentally altered by the reboot. The flood may have washed away more than cities. It may have been a recalibration of the environment itself, a change in the fundamental parameters of life on the planet to ensure the next iteration of the project would not repeat the errors of the first. And so we, the inheritors of this second creation, exist within a legacy we cannot perceive. Our history does not begin with a garden, but on the foundation of a ruin, a ghost project whose operational failures dictated the terms of our own existence. We may be living inside the corrected code, a version of humanity designed specifically to avoid the noise that led to the recall of our predecessors. Our very nature, our limitations, our mortality, all may be features, not flaws, engineered into the system to ensure we never again threaten its stability. The records, then, are not just about the past. They are a partial schematic of the present. They describe the foundational parameters of our own world, a world that was born from the deliberate erasure of another. The silence from before the flood is not an absence of history. It is the sound of a firewall, a barrier erected to separate our carefully managed reality from the wild, unpredictable, and failed experiment that came before. To continue following this thread is to accept that the story of our world may be a sequel. It is to acknowledge that the oldest questions we have about our purpose and origin might be unanswerable because the relevant files were permanently deleted before our own chapter was written. This changes the meaning of the Anunnaki's eventual disappearance from the human record. Their slow fade from history is not the departure of gods who have lost interest. It is the withdrawal of a project team after the successful deployment of a stable version. The system was running within acceptable parameters. The managers could now monitor it from a distance. Their work here, for the time being, was done. Our entire history, then, all our empires, our religions, our sciences, may be taking place in a closed system, a sandbox environment created from the wreckage of a previous, more ambitious project. We are the descendants of the survivors of a product recall, living out a script whose prologue has been sealed, classified, and buried under a layer of sterile clay and 4,000 years of carefully managed silence. The final unsettling implication is not about who these beings were or where they came from. It is about the nature of the project itself. If the creation and management of a species is a process so routine that it can be documented in the cold, procedural language of a field report, then it suggests this was not the first time they had done it. We are left with the chilling possibility that we are not a unique creation, but simply one more iteration of a standard biological asset, deployed on one more territory in a vast, ancient, and ongoing enterprise. The light in the archive has not changed. It still falls on the small rectangle of baked clay, the object that began this inquiry. The tablet from Nippur does not offer any more answers than it did at the start. Its cuneiform script, having delivered its report, has fallen silent again. It has reverted to its true nature, not a voice, but a thing. A piece of the earth that was given a temporary and terrible memory, now resting under glass, its purpose fulfilled. It has testified, and its testimony has only deepened the silence it was meant to break. The story is over, but the object remains, indifferent to our questions. We came to this record seeking a beginning, a point of origin. Instead, we found a boundary, a line drawn after an erasure. The narrative does not feel like a memory that has been preserved. It feels like an explanation that has been authorized. The weight we are left with is not the weight of knowledge, but the weight of this document's coldness. The dispassionate tone of the scribe is the story's true and lasting ghost, a voice that recorded the end of a world as if it were closing a ledger for the fiscal year. The questions raised by the text are now secondary to the question of the text itself. The hum of the building is the only sound, a low, constant frequency that holds the dust of millennia in suspension. Outside the walls of this collection, the world continues its own noisy, complex, and unrecorded existence. But here, inside, time is a different substance. It is measured by the slow decay of inorganic matter, by the half-life of the clay. We have spent this time in the company of a report whose authors are gone, whose subject is a terminated project, and whose purpose is a mystery sealed by its own administrative clarity. The air itself feels ancient, heavy with the gravity of an unclosed file. All the details, the names and the numbers, the cycles of creation and the methods of culling now recede. They dissolve back into the texture of the clay, leaving behind only the stark architecture of the event. A problem, a series of failed solutions, and a final executive order. The facts did not illuminate the past. They outlined the shape of a void. We have been given the official minutes from a meeting we were never meant to know about, and the most important item on the agenda, the ultimate purpose of the entire enterprise, was never recorded, for it was not relevant to the matter at hand. Imagine, for a moment, the ruins of Nippur under a moonless sky. The wind moves through the excavated foundations, carrying dust from one broken wall to another. This is the source, the place where the record was kept, and the place where it was buried and forgotten. The ground here does not feel holy. It feels industrial. It is a decommissioned site, a silent factory where the machinery was shut down, the workers were dismissed, and the files were left to turn back into earth. The silence here is not one of peace, but of abandonment. It is the silence of a project concluded. This silence is an active force. It is the final and most successful form of erasure. The wind and the dust do not care about the names of the Anunnaki or the complaint of Enlil. They are slowly, patiently, burying the evidence again, returning the meticulous records of the scribes to the undifferentiated dirt from which they were formed. To stand in such a place is to feel the immense, planetary scale of forgetting, a process against which the act of writing on a piece of clay seems a small and temporary defiance. The desert is the ultimate archivist, and its final catalog is always empty. The tablet, then, is an anomaly, a piece of evidence that survived the purge. It is a stray document from a closed case, a single page from a report whose other volumes are lost forever. Its survival does not grant us access to the truth. It only confirms the existence of a story that was meant to be erased. It forces us to wonder what other records did not survive, what other, even stranger truths were successfully scrubbed from the operational memory of the world before the second project, our own, was launched. We are left not with a conclusion, but with a resonance, the feeling that our own history is built upon a foundation that is deliberately hidden from us. The record of Atrahasis does not need to be a literal account of events to be true. Its truth lies in the mindset it reveals, a way of seeing the world not as a sacred creation, but as a managed asset, and of seeing our species not as a child of the divine, but as a functional component within a larger, impersonal machine. This is the thought that lingers long after the details of the story have faded. And the scribe, the unseen hand that wrote it all down, was there a moment of hesitation as he pressed the stylus into the wet clay? A flicker of understanding at the sheer alien coldness of the report he was copying? Or was he simply a functionary, a part of the same system, his mind on the precision of the signs, the quality of the clay, the importance of creating a durable and accurate record for an archive whose purpose he did not need to question? His neutrality is the final, impenetrable wall between us and the event. Look once more at the object itself. The fine crack that runs across its face is no longer just a mark of age. It is the story's true horizon. On one side are the words we can read, on the other, the silence we can only infer. It is a physical boundary, a line drawn in the earth of the tablet itself, separating the known report from the unknowable reality. The story is permanently, physically incomplete, and in this, it may be the most honest document we have ever recovered from the ancient world. The narrator's voice now withdraws. The guide has led you to the object and has shared what the record contains. Now you are alone with it. The vigil is a private one. The presence that remains in this quiet room is your own. You are the final witness to the report. The echo of the scribe's account now resides in your memory, another temporary archive for a story that has outlived its own world. The responsibility is no longer to listen, but to hold the silence that follows. The names and the events begin to feel distant, like the memory of a dream. What remains is not a narrative, but a single, sustained feeling. The feeling of standing at the edge of an immense, dark ocean of time, holding a single broken shell that speaks not of the ocean itself, but only of one small, temporary tide. The scale of the story has collapsed the story itself, leaving behind only a sense of profound and unsettling antiquity. The object is returned to its context. A museum case. A collection. It is one artifact among thousands, its label bearing a number, a location, a date. It has been reabsorbed into the administrative system of our own world, its story filed away under mythology. It is an item in a ledger once more, its operational strangeness contained, catalogued, and rendered safe. Its brief time as a voice is over. The light fades. The room returns to darkness. The tablet, the record, the report, all are invisible now, resting in the quiet. Nothing has been solved. Nothing has been proven. A story was remembered for a time. And then, the silence, which was here before the story began, and which will remain long after the last of us has forgotten it, reclaims the space,